Since we've been working with ratios and proportions, today we're going to talk a little bit about percentages and how percentages connect with some of the things we've been learning about in our unit. A big connection with a percentage is the fact that a percentage is a type of ratio. We know that a ratio is a comparison between two different amounts. A percentage compares an amount to 100. So it is a type of ratio that's comparing to 100. What we're going to specifically look at today is how to use some things we've been learning in our unit to go back and forth between fraction and percent form. This is something that you've worked with a little bit already. We looked at this in a previous lesson, but today we're going to look at some alternate strategies, and we'll talk about why we're going to look at those alternate strategies as well. So we're going to start with how to turn a percent into a fraction. So one way that you learned, we're actually going to start with, the last time we visited percentages, we said a percent was out of 100. So an easy way to write a percent as a fraction is just to take that percentage and put it out of 100 and then simplify the percentage, reduce the percentage. Now where this percentage gets a little complicated that we weren't seeing before is that this percentage already has a fraction in it. So now we've got a situation where we have a fraction inside a fraction, which we don't like to do. Simplified fractions should have a whole number numerator and a whole number denominator. So the way we can fix that is to think of our fraction as division. So rather than thinking of this as 24.5 over 100, we're going to think of this as 24.5 divided by 100. We already did a little bit of work with dividing fractions. Just to give some reminders, when we divide fractions, all of our numbers have to be turned into improper fractions. So that means if we're going to do this division, we have to turn our 24.5 into an improper fraction. So that would turn into 49 halves divided by 100. And again, we could turn any whole number into a fraction by putting it over 1. So that sets up our division. When we reviewed dividing, we talked about how you can take the second number and flip it over, use its reciprocal, and turn it into a multiplication problem that will give you the answer. So 49 over 2 divided by 100 over 1 is the same as 49 over 2 times 1 over 100. So now we can come through and just do our multiplying. 49 times 1 is 49. 2 times 100 is 200. So that gives us our fraction. And notice now we do not have any fractions within a fraction. We have a whole number numerator and a whole number denominator. So 24.5% turned into a fraction is 49 over 200. Now, once you get that ending fraction, if you are able to do any simplifying, then you should do that third step, which is to simplify. In this case, we aren't going to do that because 49 and 200 do not have any common factors, so it already is in simplified form. But just be aware of that third step when you're able to do it. So that is a way to turn a percent into a fraction. We should also be able to go the other direction with that, a fraction back to a percent. In an earlier lesson, we learned one way of doing this. The way that you learned before was to take the fraction and to rescale it. So to try to make the fraction be out of 100. On this particular fraction, the thing about that that's hard is that in order to scale up a fraction, I would have to multiply the fraction by something to make it out of 100. And there's no whole number that I can multiply 7 by that would get me from 7 to 100, which makes this a harder fraction to work with. So rather than thinking of it that way, which is how we were doing it before, we can put to work some things we've been learning about proportions. So we know that we want to take this 4 out of 7 and we want to make it into a percentage out of 100. So we know we want to rescale it, we're just not sure how to do that. So rather than trying to figure out what to multiply 7 by to get to 100, you can look at this proportion that we just made. You can take the original fraction and write it as a proportion out of 100 because that's what a percentage is. Which means since we have a proportion, we can use our proportion solving strategies from this chapter. So we can come through and use our cross multiply to solve the proportion. So 7 times x is 7x. 4 times 100 is 400. And now all I have to do is just divide, and it takes me straight to my percentage, which in this case is a pretty long decimal. So I am actually going to say about, and I'm going to round it to the nearest hundredth. It is about 57.14%, because we just made it out of 100. So 4/7 as a percent is 57.14%. So we can use some things we've been learning about solving proportions to help us take a tricky fraction, or a fraction that's harder to work with, and convert it into percent form. At this point, you need to make sure that you have both examples filled into your notes outline as they show up or as you see them on your screen. When your work matches what you see on your screen, then you can go ahead and move on and try your You Try problems. When you're done, check your work with Mrs. Hall.